before we get into that, a couple things I want to bring to your attention. Over at BangTheBook.com, Parker Michaels, is doing a fantastic job with his daily NHL write-ups. Please make sure that you check those out. Getting a lot of positive feedback from some of the heavier hitters in the online NHL betting community. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what they think of his work, and obviously we're very happy with his work as well. So please check those out. See what he has to say. Very detailed game breakdowns. His model incorporates individual players. So this is a lot of hard work that he's doing, and we're very lucky to have it over there at BangTheBook.com. Also, we'll have all 16 college football games previewed here for this week, all 16 NFL games previewed for this week, all the NBA games every day, all the NHL games every day, and a large selection of college basketball matchups as well. So we are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information over at BangTheBook.com. Finally, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio is presented by DSI Sportsbook. If you sign up over at DSI using that promo code BTB and the number 25, you get a $25 free bet just for signing up, 100% deposit match bonus for the sportsbook, and 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino as well. At BetDSI, it's only a game until you bet it. Two guests coming your way here today. The first, Mr. Bryan Leonard from WagerTalk.com. Bryan, how's it going today, man?
Good morning. Everything's going great. Good to talk to you.
All right, well, we're at Conference Championship Week here in college football. So 16 games, as I mentioned there a second ago, a lot of them in the Sun Belt for the regular season, Louisiana, Monroe, and Florida State for the Seminoles extending their bowl streak. But otherwise, it's conference championships. And we know that sharp bettors such as yourself want to look for value in some of those games that aren't getting a whole lot of press. Unfortunately, the games this week are getting a lot of press. So do you have a lightened workload this week, or do you just have to dig a little bit harder to try and find some edges?
Well, that's the thing is when you've got less games to play as opposed to what you have on a regular schedule, if you do your later workload, you're probably not going to have the advantage that you normally have. This is the 1 week, and I used to do this all the time when I had a lot of success in the NBA, was I would read every paper from every team. Well, during a college football and obviously a college basketball, you just can't do that. But this is the week when you've got a lesser amount of games. And we know enough about the NFL right now, so you don't need to do as much work on the NFL as the season goes on. And there's so much information out there for the NFL. You do have to do it for the college, and you need to be able to read the newspapers. And unfortunately, half of the games are the Sun Belt, as you pointed out. And it's tougher to get the information for the Sun Belt because they're not highly reported. But, you got to do a little bit more work, even though there's lesser games. You got to go a little bit more deeper.
Now, here's something that we've talked about in the past here, and we'll touch on this briefly and then take a look at the MAC championship game. The fact that you sell premium selections, the fact that you have clients, a lot of times – people want to bet these big games. They're on TV. They're going to watch them. They want to have action on them. We've talked about this in the past, but I want to touch on it again here with this year with conference championships. And, of course, as we head into bowl season where you're going to have some very significant bowl games, do you feel additional pressure to put something out because these games are so high profile?
Well, I've been doing this for 35 years or so my customers know that if it's not a game I'm betting, I'm not going to release it. So I'm only trying to bet what I have an advantage on. For a bowl season, there's some guys that will put out games on every single bowl game, and which is fine if they're actually betting every single bowl game. But to be honest with you, unless you're a degenerate in this industry, you are not putting all your money on every games that you don't have an edge on. You'll never be profitable. So if you wouldn't do it yourself, I don't know how you could do it for your clients. So you just have to let your clients know if they're a guy that wants a lot of volume, you're probably not the guy that they want. If you want somebody who's going to pick out and choose the best plays, then that would be me or some other guys out there. So, everybody does something a little bit different. But that's always what I've done. I've had more success, smaller amount of plays, and I've never really done I passed a lot of Monday Night Footballs and things like that. Guys are going to bet it anyway, but, if my opinion is no better than theirs, then why would I charge something for that? So, it's as long as the client knows going in what your philosophy is on it all, I think he chooses whoever he thinks works out best for him.
All right, well, you are an expert in the Mid-American Conference, so that's where we'll go here this week and then focus on the NFL with you. Akron takes on Toledo, and you and I were talking about this game a little bit last night in terms of the fact that you don't see 21-point spreads in conference championship games. And this is one where it feels like the number is high, but then as you start breaking down these two teams and compare the body of work, I mean, it seems like it's justified.
Yeah, the line opened, I believe, with the win at 18, now up to 21, so they're taking money on Toledo. It's in the dome, fast track. I mean, that's obviously going to help Toledo. But you go back and you look, they played once before, and the line was 15 at Toledo. So if you take out their home field of probably 3.5 of the Glass Dome, we're looking at 11.5 a month ago, and the line's 10 points, 9.5 points higher on a neutral now than it was then. So I don't know why that is. What has changed? I know that Akron's had quarterback injuries, but the backup quarterback to me has looked just as good as the starter. The Akron defense, sure, they've struggled at times, and they give up 48 to Toledo, and they did lose that game at Toledo by 27. But they were off. That was the second straight back-to-back road game, and they just beat conference champion Western Michigan the week before. So it definitely would have been a letdown spot for Akron against Toledo in that one. But I keep track of the first half numbers, and Toledo outgained them 8.7 to 3.8. So that was no doubt they were winning 24-7 at the half. Toledo was definitely the better team that night. As I pointed out, the spot wasn't that great for Akron. But now off of that, and a month later, do you make a 9.5-point differential? I'm having a hard time buying into it. If I had to play this, it would be the Akron side. I only made it 16, so I didn't make it much difference from what it was before. 2.5-point differential, they made it 9.5. So Toledo did expect to be here. Akron, maybe they're thinking Akron's fat and happy to be able to get here. They'd been here before. They lost the championship, or they won the championship, I believe, last time in 2012. I believe Akron was there. So Akron's a team that's made pretty good money on the season. They've covered 8 of their last 9 games. It's rare that you see a line move against a team that's been on a hot run like that. Maybe there's going to be some buyback. I don't know. I thought maybe there'd be some already. It's already at 21.5 at the sharper book. So the wise guys are telling you that the Toledo side is the way to go in this game, at least the early money. I'm kind of leaning the other way at this point.
Well, that's what's so interesting about this game is that, you have another game on the board that was a blowout between North Texas and Florida Atlantic, and that number is sitting out there at 11 in Boca Raton. And when those two teams played earlier on in the year, Florida Atlantic was only a 3.5-point favorite. So another game where we saw a big adjustment pretty much based on a one-game sample size, and both of the dogs in those two games, North Texas and Akron, in really bad spots. That North Texas spot, as I mentioned earlier in the week here on the show, one of the worst ones of the season with a huge comeback win, last-second touchdown pass, quarterback took a beating, all that type of thing. The Toledo game, as you mentioned, back-to-back road games, plus that Western Michigan game had to be pushed from Saturday to Sunday because the field flooded in Kalamazoo. So it's hard because everything in us as a handicapper, and we'll talk about this on the NFL side here in a minute, everything in us, looks for these types of things where you've got probably an overvalue in the line, an over-adjustment in the line, and it can be really frustrating to not be able to play those.
Yeah, Akron's 5-5 against FBS opponents. They lost to Penn State, they lost to Iowa State, they lost to Troy, they lost to Toledo, and then they lost that game to Miami of Ohio. They did get the cover in that game, but this is a team. They're 5-5 against FBS teams. They were only favored in 2 of those games all season long, against Ball State by 4.5 and against Bowling Green by 3. So Akron's been a very good dog all season long. And they're going to come into this game with confidence. That, obviously they got blown out last time they played Toledo, but I think they're going to be ready, play a good game here. And Toledo, just keep in mind, Toledo just a couple weeks ago were at Bowling Green and they were laying 17.5. They were at Ohio who didn't even win the conference 3 weeks ago, or actually 4 weeks ago now, and they laid three at Ohio. So the neutral line's probably 6. Now they're playing the conference champion that beat Ohio in that division, and they're laying 15 points more. There's a reason out there somewhere. I just haven't come across it yet, and at this point, I don't want any part of Toledo laying that number. You could have great numbers with Toledo. They were laying Northern Illinois at home at 8, and now they're laying 21.5 against a similar Akron team. So, to me, it's the dog and nothing right now. Unless I do a little bit more work and find something else out. But, yeah, it's going to have to be a pretty good reason.
Well, and then you run into kind of a thing, we just talked about this point a little bit about extra added pressure to possibly put something out here on Conference Championship weekend. That's the difference between being, a pick seller and a personal bettor, is that if you want to play this game but don't want to sell it, at least you have that luxury. And you've kind of talked to our listeners here that you feel like Akron is the value side. Do you have a buy point in mind? I mean, does this thing have to get higher for you to get more confident in it? Because it's like we're talking about key numbers or anything.
No, it's already gone over the 21.5. 23 would be the next one I'm looking for. But at this point, it's more reading into the what's going on, making sure everybody's going to play. So the numbers where I love it. I mean, at that point, it's just that I need to go back and double check and make sure that I haven't missed key injuries or something of that fact. Maybe I haven't seen the center for Akron is injured or something to that effect, or maybe the kicker's out or something that I normally wouldn't be something that I was going to look for. I don't see the love for Toledo in this game, and Toledo can come out and blow them out. I mean, like I said, they beat them by 27 at home, but we're looking for value, and when you're trying to find something like that, you're trying to find something that has at least a 53% chance of covering. And at this point, to me, Akron clearly at that number has a better than 53% chance of covering if everybody is healthy. So just one of those games that you're going to have to read the practice reports.
One more thing I'll ask you about here, and this is kind of a general point about conference championship games, but we can factor it into this one. You got Miami and Clemson and Charlotte. You've got Ohio State, I think it's a 2.5 hour drive from Indianapolis. You have some of these teams, Georgia, they're not in Atlanta, but they're in Athens. They're at least in the state. You have some of these teams that are playing in close proximity to where their campuses are located. Toledo, obviously much closer to Detroit than Akron is, but Akron's only another hour and a half or so away from there. So what do you do about this pseudo home field type thing in these conference championship games? Does it factor in the line for you?
I think it depends. It depends on if the teams have played at this site before. The MAC Championship's been at the Ford Field for years, and both teams have played there. I know when Akron played there, obviously it was a decade ago, so none of these kids were there. Toledo's one of those teams that plays there, so they're a little bit more familiar with it. And as you mentioned, it's basically right across the state line there in Detroit. So you would have to give them a slight edge, but a lot of it would have to be on who's played here before. And you see that a lot where you've got a team that's been, especially if it's at a place where, for example, let's use Las Vegas. The Las Vegas Bowl is usually a team from the Mountain West against a team from the Pac-12, and if a team from the Pac-12 hasn't been to Vegas in a long time, they're going to be a lot more excited than a team that already plays one game a season or one game every 2 seasons in Las Vegas. So it would have a little bit more meaning there. So it's I think you have to take it on a game-to-game basis. Some teams are very good travelers. Miami this year, Toledo went to Nevada, and Nevada's been so up and down this year, and they win that game by 13. Then they go to Miami and actually were winning at the half, and then they got crushed. But, they've had a lot of success on the road other than the loss to Ohio, and we've talked about that was a game that Toledo thought they were going to play Ohio, and they didn't want to show much, and obviously that didn't turn out so well for Toledo. They got crushed and ended up not playing Ohio anyway. So But you got to take a look at how these teams do when they're playing on the road in big games, and both of these teams have done pretty well.
All right, let's move over to the NFL side here, and we actually have a pretty good NFL card this week. Several games that I'm intrigued about. Even some of the games that feature some of the bottom feeders, kind of interesting. San Francisco, Chicago, Jimmy Garoppolo going for the 49ers. The Bears, do they play for John Fox? Because it certainly didn't feel like they played last week. Maybe Philadelphia is just that good, and we'll talk about the Eagles here in a little bit. But in terms of looking at the overall NFL card here, there are a few games I want to touch on with you, Brian. Let's start with this Chiefs versus Jets game. Interesting line move in this one. The Jets opened 5, down to 3 with extra juice. There are a couple 3.5s out there as well. And you and I were talking about this team a little bit yesterday in that I feel like I haven't seen a team fall this far, this quickly, like the Kansas City Chiefs have done over the last 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah. I knew Kansas City wasn't quite as good as what they were, but the drop-off has been pretty big. Obviously, the quarterback Alex Smith on field, and the team made the adjustments around it. And the first part of the season, it wasn't a big deal, but as the year goes on and they get more film on Kansas City and realize that he doesn't throw the ball, doesn't have the ability to throw the ball downfield, it shortens the field. The defensive players can don't have to worry about the long passes, and Kansas City is obviously struggled in that regard. But I do like Alex Smith. He's a guy, they call him a game manager. I don't care what you call him. He's a guy that doesn't turn the ball over to me, and that's something that's really big. And you look at how I've got everything broken down by the first halves, but you look at turnovers. In that first game against New England, they lost the turnover battle in the first half by 1. Every game since then, they've never been in a deficit. Even the games lately, they haven't been in a deficit in turnover. So when you go into the second half, we all know that if you lose the turnover battle, it's about 76% of the time, maybe even higher, that the team loses the game. So they're going into the half, and they're basically playing their game in the first half. Now, when it gets to the second half and they're behind, that's when they get in trouble. And, the last couple of weeks, the last 3 weeks, they were down 13-3 to Buffalo, 6-3 to the Giants, 14-10 to Dallas. So those are 3 teams that, not the greatest teams, obviously, but those were 3 games in which Kansas City was behind, which takes them out of their comfort zone, which means the second half of the game, they have to throw the football a little bit more, do things they don't feel as strongly about, and that's where they've gotten in trouble. The games before that, beginning of the year, the first 3 games, they were up or right there in the game within 3 points. First 5 games of the season, they were never trailing by more than 3 points at the half. So Kansas City is one of those teams that if you like to play second half football, it's a team you don't want to back when they're behind in a game, and obviously that is something that's worked out once again this year. But you're right. It's the team that the second half of the season, basically, they've gotten their best players have been shut down. Obviously, the running back from Toledo that got such a great pub earlier in the season, he has done nothing at that point going forward after looking so good early on. And it's a team you know what you're getting out of Kansas City for the most part. If they've got the lead and playing their game, they look good. If they're from behind and they've got to do things that they normally don't do, they struggle.
Yeah, and maybe it is that cut and dry, and that's been one of the problems for me this year with the NFL is that, a lot of the things that you've done in the past, a lot of the things that you expect to work, fading teams that look like they've reached a peak in terms of their lines or, back-to-back road games, bad travel spots, this and that. A lot of times these things just haven't worked out this season. And with Kansas City, they were a team I did try to fade a couple of times early on just because I was looking at that body of work and saying, okay, this isn't sustainable. And I was a little bit too early with doing that, which is frustrating. But then you look at last week, losing outright to Buffalo. I know you had the Bills last week, which was a great call by you. So then this week, they're only a 3.5-point favorite against the Jets team that was supposed to win, 4 games this year, 3 games this year? So it's very interesting to see, how the stock market, so to speak, of this team has just fallen off so dramatically. So the question here, is this the right line move? I mean, should this number have gone down, and is there any value left on taking the home dog?
I think so. The Jets have really impressed me all season long. Obviously, nobody thought much of them, but they continue to go out there and give it all every game. Last 2 weeks, they lose to Tampa Bay 15-10 before the bye, and then to Carolina 35-27. I had Carolina last week, and I was lucky to win that game, as I thought they were outplayed in that contest. But they were able to get that last field goal and cover the number of Carolina. But yeah, the Jets are a team that continues to play hard, and as a sports fan, as a sports bettor, you want teams that are giving it all every week, especially if they're in the underdog role and don't win many games. We've seen all the wise guys last year on the Browns continually put money on them. The Jets are that kind of team this year that nobody gives them any credit, but you go back and you look over their schedule, you know, the only 10 games they haven't covered was against Buffalo in the opener, Oakland the game after that, and then the last 2 games against Tampa and Carolina. They had a nice string before that where they're covering against everybody, including the New England Patriots and the Atlanta Falcons, 2 playoff teams, Jacksonville also. So this is a team in the Jets. They're not impressive. The offense does just what it needs to do, but that defense has held them in there all season long. And you know what you're going to get out of the Jets. And like I said, you pretty much know what you're going to get out of Kansas City. This is a game, I'm looking to play the Jets here. This is one of the games that I've got circled. I haven't bet it yet. But there's still some 3.5s out there. There's some 3s. So unless there's a whole ton of money comes in and paints the screen black, you should be able to get 3.5 here on the Jets.
That's what I was going to ask you about is, you know, the Chiefs were such a public team early on in the year because they were doing so well. I mean, you had, you know, those guys having big fantasy games, and that kind of drives the public betting market a little bit as well. So that's what I was kind of wondering is where do you think this number maybe touches back up to 4? Do you think that, you know, we might just get 3.5 flats, the best we're going to do?
There's a better, well, right now the sharper books are sitting at like 3 -119 for Pinnacle, 3 -118 for Chris. So they're right there toggling between the 2, 3 and 3.5. If you take a look at most of the books, South Point 3.5. So they don't shade anything. South Point is 110 no matter what they put up there. That's their policy. So it's basically 3 1/4, as they say, and I'm not so sure it's going to change much. I don't see a lot of people coming in to play the Jets. The general public probably won't come in to play the Jets. It's probably not a game the general public's really looking at. I wouldn't think is, especially if from the Kansas City side, because they just haven't been able to make any money on them, and guys like to bet on whoever's been good to them lately. So that's the thing in this one is I don't think it's going to move. So we're in no reason to go out and bet it right now. But the 3 obviously means a whole lot more than the 4. So if you're a Jets fan and you want to play the Jets here, obviously as soon as it moves, if it moves anything from 3.5 to 3, you just want to jump on it. I wouldn't wait around for the 4.
All right, let's slide down the board a couple spots here to game 373, 374. The Rams take on the Cardinals. Rams laying a touchdown here in the desert in this spot. And I think this is a very interesting line, and I want to get your thoughts on this because I think that there's clear value on one of these teams here in this game, and that's the Arizona Cardinals. It feels to me like the Rams win over the Saints last week, getting a lot more respect in the betting market than Arizona's win over Jacksonville. And I'm not sure that that's a fair assessment for the books to make here because, you know, I get it. Jacksonville is a team that needs to learn how to win consistently, needs to learn, you know, how to live up to some new expectations. The Saints are traveling cross-country as a team that had covered, 7 or 8 in a row? Like, one of those was coming for them. So, I don't know. I feel like this line is mispriced by at least a full point, if not more.
Yeah, I agree. This is one of the other games I've got. I've got 6 games that I've got circled here to do a little bit more work on, and Arizona was one of them. And one of the things I take a look at, and it's not a be-all, end-all, but I take a look at the explosive plays. Arizona's +10 on the season, and the Rams are +6. Now, who would have ever thought that? This Arizona team is one of those teams. Defensively, they've only given up 34 plays all season long of 20 yards or more, and that's really what the Rams try to do. They've got 53 of their own on the season, so the Rams are trying to get that big explosive play against you. And you take a look at Minnesota. They played them 2 weeks ago and really shut down. They only had 2 explosive plays. Last time they played Arizona, they only had 1 explosive play in that game. Now, obviously, they were up 30. They win the game 33-0, up 23-0 at the half. So they built their lead and then just ran the ball the rest of the game. But that's one of the drawbacks about following explosive plays, because the Browns have actually got a pretty good number of explosive plays. But that just means that they're behind in the game and got to throw all the time. But when you've got teams around the 500 mark like the Arizona is, that's usually not the case. And they've got the shutout revenge from earlier in the season. And if you take a look at the games that they have played, obviously they lose to Dallas on Monday Night Football by 11, and that was the game that it was clear that they could not throw the football. They had some injuries there and they weren't able to do it. Offensive line injuries back then were a major concern, and I think that was the telling sign in that one, because I bet that in live betting. But then they played San Francisco at home, they beat them. They played Tampa at home, they beat them. They played Seattle, they only lose by 6 at home against Seattle, and then Jacksonville last week, plus a 3-point win. So that's a pretty good resume, playing at home. And you're looking at the Rams. They go on the road and they beat Dallas by 5. They beat San Francisco by 2. Beat Jacksonville by 10 is probably a good win for them. And then obviously they played the Giants there and crushed the Giants, which a lot of people have done this season. And then they lose to Minnesota. So they played pretty well on the road, but they've done basically what you thought they would do. It's too high for me. Jacksonville, Arizona was getting +6 last week against Seattle. They're getting +6.5 against the Rams. They're getting 7. I think there's some value here on Arizona.
All right, one more game I want to touch on with you here, and we'll go to Sunday Night Football, for this one. The Philadelphia Eagles are now up to a 6-point favorite at both DSI and Bookmaker. 6 at Bovada and MyBookie, some 5.5s out there, but also some 5s at Pinnacle and the Greek, which is interesting. And when we talk about looking for context clues in the lines, you can also do that by looking at what lines are available at what sports books. But you've got this Philadelphia team that just look like the Alabama of the NFL. They're just winning methodically, taking care of business. Oh, and they're covering basically every number you throw at them. Doesn't matter what the steam is. Doesn't matter that there's an inflation on the price. Philadelphia's covering regardless. Here we see them pumped up from a -3 with extra juice favorite or some 3.5s out there up into this 5.5, 6 range for game 377, 378. And I don't know what to do with this game, Brian. I mean, Seattle seems like a misleading, it seems like a misleading record that the Seahawks have this year, because, all the talk is about the Seahawks not doing this right, the Seahawks not doing that right. Well, they are still a 7-4 football team right now and in a position to make the playoffs, but now they're getting 5.5, 6 at home. Can you step in front of this Eagles train?
It's funny when you take a look at Seattle playing at home, and obviously the 12th man and the whole bit. They were a pick-em when they played Atlanta a couple weeks ago, and they at home and they lose by 3. But Seattle hasn't been a home underdog since all the way back in 2012, and they were 3-0 against the spread in that regard that season. So this is a rarity you see here with Seattle. All the stats show Philadelphia, and I agree with those. I think Philadelphia, to me, is the most well-rounded team in the NFL. You look at Seattle, first half defense. The first game of the season, they win 16-14 first half against Washington. Since then, they have not allowed more than 10 points in the first half in any game all season long. That defense has just been terrific. But they do have an easy schedule after this game. They play the Giants, Oakland on Monday Night Football at home, and then Dallas. So this could be a show-me game for Philadelphia to go into Seattle. But when you take a look at what their record is this season, they're just so far ahead of everybody else that they're already basically in the playoffs. Nobody else in their division is even making a run at them. What is the importance of this game? Like I said, it could be the show-me game that they want, and then after that can coast through the rest of the season. Or it could be that right now they're worried about resting some of their players and getting some guys healthy. Whereas Seattle, they did pull out the win last week against San Francisco, but this is a team, Seattle needs every win they possibly can get the rest of the season. after they play Philadelphia here. Really tough schedule. They play Philadelphia at home. They go on the road to Jacksonville, and then they got to play the Rams at home, finish the season with Dallas and Arizona. So if you're looking at it from which team needs it more, it's obviously Seattle. And as I pointed out, they haven't been a home dog since 2012. So this is one of those games I'm going to probably play in-game as opposed to earlier, because I don't know the mental state of Philadelphia and how they're going to treat this game. I know what I'm going to get out of Seattle. They've got a lot of injuries, but this is their season here. If they lose this game, this is really going to hurt them and trying to get to the playoffs. They need to be able to prove that they can beat a team like Philadelphia. So maybe Philadelphia does come in here and say, this is the one game we want to show it, because they just play, they came out of the bye and they played Dallas and Chicago. That was no competition. And going into the bye, they played San Francisco and Denver. So they haven't really had a major game, a show-me game, since they played Carolina back on October 12th. So they've been very fortunate where they haven't had to get up for these teams. Well, will they get up for Seattle, or how are they going to treat it? Rather than guess how that's going to happen ahead of time, I think I would rather watch the game and see how it comes out that way and be able to make some adjustments and make some bets at that point.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And a lot of things you said here on today's show, as always, made a lot of sense. Great insights from Bryan Leonard of WagerTalk.com. What's going on over there at Wager Talk right now, Bryan?
Yeah, we're on a real hot run in just about every sport we've been on. If you've been following us on Twitter, at B. Leonard Sports, I've been tweeting out our second half plays, and those have been on a nice little run for us the last couple of weeks. So, follow us on Twitter, and I always tweet out anything that I think is pertinent. Sometimes I'll tweet out something that I think is funny, and I don't put out a lot of stuff into your timeline, so you don't have to worry about that. But getting a lot of positive response back on Twitter from sending out those plays.
Well, Bryan, always a treat, man. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks. Best of luck to everyone.